Hello, life science students. I'm going to try to be really brief and make this as short as possible. This video is to help you study for your evolution quiz, which is due by Tuesday, what is that? November 5th. It has to be done before class on Tuesday. So what you need to know for this quiz is that we have learned about two mechanisms of evolution. We've learned about natural selection and artificial selection. They both are very similar mechanisms. Artificial selection just includes the use of human influence in choosing traits that are desired. So natural selection, therefore, is something that occurs because of environmental conditions. Our example of natural selection was that peppered moth. The black peppered moth became more predominant in the population because it was camouflaged better in the Industrial Revolution after the trees became coated with coal. And our example of artificial selection was of dog breeds. You chose two separate breeds to mate and have offspring to hopefully produce certain traits that were good for a specific goal. Both the artificial and the natural selection happen through a specific process, and they're very, very similar processes. For both artificial and natural selection, there has to be some existing variation in the population. Here, we have green and orange beetles. In artificial selection, we had something like fast dogs and slow dogs. That just occurred naturally. That variation was there. Then you have trait selection. In this example, the birds preferentially eat the green beetles, and therefore the orange beetles have more of a chance to mate and produce offspring. In the dog example, the human, you, the dog breeder, chose two different breeds based on their traits and mated those two different breeds together to produce offspring. Lastly, and probably most importantly, is the inheritance factor. There has to be multiple generations for evolution to occur. So in this case, green beetles basically were taken out of the population because over time there wasn't enough green beetles to pass on their genes. In the dog example, you chose the two breeds to mate and have offspring, but it was their offspring that you were truly interested in. Okay. Natural selection is not something that occurs to promote perfection. Evolution doesn't happen to make a perfect world. There's no goals in evolution. Evolution is just something that happens. It's a process. So we looked today, Friday, at that Survival of the Sneakiest cartoon. That link is still up on the website if you want to go back and reread that cartoon. I suggest doing that. Survival of the fittest doesn't always mean the strongest or the healthiest or the fastest or the largest. Think back to the peppered moth example. Really, the fittest organism was just based on color. The black ones survived because they matched their environment better. They weren't stronger, they weren't bigger, they weren't fiercer. They just fit the environment of the time better. Viable offspring is another kind of side topic, but very important. In evolution, the offspring have to be viable. They have to be able to mate and produce their own offspring. So a non-example, or an example of a offspring that is not viable, is when you breed together a donkey and a horse. That produces a mule. Mules are infertile. Therefore, the gene line stops there. And that would not be a case of evolution, because genes are not being passed down generation and generation. Whoopsie, went too far. Lastly, we have adaptations. So we saw this video where there were many species that had particular adaptations to make them fit into their environment better. This bug is an example of that. What I want you to be clear on, though, is that organisms do not try to adapt. This bug did not say, oh, I really want to look like a leaf, I really want to look like a leaf, and poof, it looked like a leaf. What happened was, over generations, organisms of that insect that looked more like leaves or blended into their environment better survived and therefore were able to reproduce. So over time, the traits that made that insect more able to survive, mate, and reproduce were passed down generation to generation until eventually you had an insect that really looked like a leaf. That concept ties into this concept of that adaptation doesn't happen within a single generation. You cannot have evolution occur in one generation. That would just be magic. Like I said before, this bug doesn't just think to itself, oh, I really want to look like a leaf, and then poof. That would be magic, and that doesn't happen. Okay, I'm going to cut it off there. I hope you have a great weekend. Please contact me if you have any questions